The town of Santa Rosa was the kind of place where the wind always felt like it was whispering secrets. It was a town of gray concrete, tired buildings, and people who worked very hard just to keep their lights on. Among those people was Marisol Vega. Marisol was 43 years old, but her hands felt older. She spent her days scrubbing floors in the big office buildings downtown. Her life was a quiet one. She was a widow, which meant her husband had passed away many years ago, and she had no children to fill her small apartment with laughter or noise. Every night at precisely 9:19 p.m., she took the same bus home, and every night she saw him. Sitting on a cold plastic bench at the outskirts of town was a boy. He looked no more than 9 years old. He was Mexican with dark, messy hair and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world. His clothes were thin and dirty, and he was barefoot, even when the night air turned into a biting frost. He didn't beg for money. He didn't ask for food. He simply sat there, clutching a torn blue backpack to his chest like it was a shield made of gold. Most people walked past him without looking. They treated him like a shadow or a piece of the bench itself. But Marisol couldn't look away. Every time the bus pulled away, she saw his small figure getting smaller in the distance, and her heart felt like it was being squeezed by a heavy hand. On a Tuesday night, the rain began to fall. It wasn't a gentle rain. It was a cold, angry downpour that turned the streets into rivers. Marisol stepped off the bus and saw the boy. He was shivering so hard his teeth clicked together, but he still sat there, guarding his backpack. Marisol walked over and held her umbrella over him. "What is your name, mijo?" she asked softly. The boy looked up. His eyes were wide and filled with a strange, flickering light, half fear, half calculation. He looked at her umbrella, then at her tired, kind face. "Daniel," he whispered. That was the moment the world began to change. Marisol didn't know that by offering this boy a hand, she was stepping into a storm that had started long before she was born. Marisol took Daniel to her apartment. It was a small place that smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. She ran a warm bath for him and found an old, oversized t-shirt for him to wear. "Where is your mama, Daniel?" she asked as she set a bowl of warm chicken soup in front of him. "Where is your house?" Daniel stared at the soup. He picked up the spoon with a hand that didn't tremble, even though he was still cold. "I don't remember," he said. He said it simply, like he was reciting a fact from a book. But Marisol saw the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the spoon. He wasn't lying because he wanted to. He was lying because he had been trained to. The next day, Marisol went to the police. She expected to see posters of a missing boy. She expected a frantic family to be waiting at the station, but there was nothing. No missing person alerts matched Daniel's description. When the social workers came to interview him, Daniel gave the same answer every time. "I don't remember. I was just walking." The government searched their databases. They checked fingerprints and school records, but it was as if Daniel had dropped from the sky. In the official files, he was a ghost child. Because Marisol had a clean record and a heart full of room, the state allowed her to foster him. A year later, the adoption became official. The judge smiled and shook Marisol's hand. "You've done a wonderful thing, Mrs. Vega," the judge said. "You've given this boy a destiny." Marisol smiled back, hugging Daniel close. She thought she was giving him a simple life, a life of school, vegetables, and safety. She didn't know that deep inside a sealed federal database in a city far away, a red light had blinked. Daniel's fingerprints had been flagged. Somewhere, a man in a dark office was looking at a computer screen, wondering how a deleted boy had suddenly reappeared on the map. For 3 years, life was peaceful. Daniel grew taller. He learned to love Marisol's cooking, and he was the smartest student in his class. He was especially good at math. While other kids were learning their multiplication tables, Daniel was reading books about global finance and computer coding. "Where do you learn these things, Daniel?" Marisol asked, watching him take apart an old radio and put it back together in 5 minutes. "It just makes sense to me, Mom," he would say. "Everything is just a puzzle." But when Daniel turned 12, the puzzles started to become nightmares. It started on a Thursday. Marisol was woken up by a sound that made her blood turn to ice. It was a scream, not the high-pitched cry of a child who had a bad dream, but a deep, guttural roar of someone facing a monster. She ran into Daniel's room. He was thrashing in his sleep, his eyes clamped shut, sweat pouring down his face. "The dock!" he shouted. "The shipment is late! Don't let them see me! Hide the ledger!" Marisol grabbed his shoulders. "Daniel, wake up! You're home! You're safe!" Daniel snapped his eyes open. For a second, he didn't look like her son. He looked like a soldier. He looked like someone who knew how to hurt people. Then the light faded, and he became a scared 12-year-old again. "What did I say?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Just nonsense, mijo," Marisol lied, pulling him into a hug. "Just a dream about a boat." But it happened again and again. Daniel began to talk in his sleep about names Marisol didn't know. Names like Alvarez and the Raven. He spoke about millions of dollars and the men in the black SUVs. Marisol began to realize that Daniel hadn't forgotten his past. His brain had hidden it behind a heavy door to protect him. But the door was starting to creak open, and whatever was behind it was dark, heavy, and very, very dangerous. By the time Daniel was 15, he was no longer just a smart kid. He was a genius. He could fix any computer in the neighborhood. He could look at a person's face and tell if they were lying. He was quiet, and he loved Marisol with a fierce loyalty. But he always seemed to be watching the door. "Why do you always sit facing the entrance, Daniel?" Marisol asked one night at a diner. Daniel looked at her, his eyes serious. "It's just a habit, Mom. I like to know who's coming." One night, the habit saved their lives. It was midnight. The apartment building was silent. Daniel suddenly sat up in bed. He didn't hear a smoke alarm. He didn't smell anything. But his internal alarm, the one he had been born with, was screaming. "Mom, get out, now!" He dragged Marisol from her bed. They ran into the hallway just as a massive explosion rocked the building. The fire spread with an unnatural speed. It didn't crawl, it leaped. They stood on the sidewalk with the other neighbors, watching the flames lick the sky. Marisol was crying. Everything she owned was in that building. Her wedding ring, her photos of Daniel as a child, and all of his school awards. Later that morning, a firefighter named Joe, who had known Marisol for years, pulled her aside. He looked troubled. "Marisol, I shouldn't tell you this," Joe whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But the fire investigators are confused. This fire didn't start in the kitchen or the basement. It started in your living room, specifically inside that metal file cabinet where you kept the adoption papers." Marisol felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "The file cabinet? It looked like a thermite charge," Joe said. "It's a chemical that burns so hot it destroys everything instantly. Someone didn't want to burn the building, Marisol. They wanted to burn the records of who Daniel is." Marisol looked at Daniel. He was standing by the fire truck, his face expressionless. He wasn't crying about his lost clothes or his burned books. He was looking at the shadows in the alleyway. He knew. He had always known that the fire was coming. After the fire, Daniel changed. He became a shadow. He stopped going to school. He spent all his time at the public library typing furiously on the computers. He looked like a man who was packing his bags for a war. On the morning of his 18th birthday, Marisol woke up to a silent house. She walked into the kitchen. There was a single cup of coffee waiting for her, still warm. Next to it was a small stack of cash, $500, and a note written in Daniel's neat, sharp handwriting. "Mom, if I stay, they will kill you to get to me. I cannot let that happen. Everything you taught me about being a good man is still here, deep inside. But the boy you found at the bus stop has to go away so the man I'm supposed to be can finish the job. Don't look for me, please. For your own safety, forget I ever existed. I love you more than the world." Marisol fell into the chair and sobbed. She didn't care about the money. She didn't care about the danger. She wanted her son. She went to the police, but they told her that since he was 18, he was legally an adult and had the right to leave. She searched the shelters. She walked the streets of Santa Rosa, calling his name until her voice was a rasp. She visited the bus stop where they had first met, sitting on that same cold plastic bench, hoping to see a barefoot boy with a blue backpack. But Daniel was gone. It was as if he had stepped into a different dimension. 5 years passed, then 10, then 20. Marisol grew old. Her hair turned the color of winter clouds and her bones began to ache. She moved into a small government housing unit, a place for people the world had mostly forgotten. She kept a single photo of Daniel tucked inside her Bible. Every night, she prayed that wherever he was, he had socks on his feet and food in his belly. She didn't know that while she was scrubbing floors to survive, her son was rewriting the history of the world. 22 years after Daniel vanished, a strange thing happened in Marisol's quiet neighborhood. It was a Tuesday, the same day of the week they had met. Marisol was sitting on her porch, knitting a sweater she knew she would never finish. Suddenly, 3 massive black SUVs turned the corner. They moved with a synchronized grace, like sharks in shallow water. They pulled up directly in front of Marisol's gate. Men in dark suits and earpieces stepped out. They moved with military precision, clearing the sidewalk and checking the rooftops. The neighbors peeked through their curtains, terrified. Then the door of the middle SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked like it was woven from midnight. He had a face that was famous on the covers of magazines. Daniel Cross, the tech billionaire, the man who had created the world's most powerful cybersecurity empire. But as he walked toward the gate, the billionaire disappeared. His shoulders dropped. His eyes filled with a soft, painful light. He walked up the creaky wooden steps and knelt on the porch at Marisol's feet. "Mom," he said. His voice was deeper now, but it had the same vibration it had when he was a boy. Marisol dropped her knitting needles. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his face. "Daniel, I'm back," he whispered, leaning his forehead against her knee. "I'm so sorry it took so long. I had to make sure the world was safe for you first." Inside the small apartment, Daniel told her the story that had been locked behind that heavy door in his mind. "My name wasn't Daniel," he explained. "I was born Mateo Alvarez. My father was the head accountant for a very powerful, very bad group of people, a crime syndicate. He was a good man who got trapped. He started keeping a secret ledger, a book that proved every crime they had ever committed." Marisol listened, her heart aching. "When I was 9, they found out," Daniel continued. "They came from my parents. But my father had a friend, a federal agent named Miller. Miller promised to protect us. He took me, erased my identity, and told me to run. He said if I ever told anyone who I was, the bad men would find me. But Miller wasn't a hero, Mom," Daniel said, his jaw tightening. "He was a traitor. He sold my location to the syndicate for $5 million. That's why I was at that bus stop. I was running from the man who was supposed to save me." He explained that the fire in their apartment hadn't been an accident. The syndicate had finally tracked his fingerprints from that quiet adoption. They wanted to kill the only living witness to their financial crimes. "I had to disappear," Daniel said. "I went into the dark web. I used the math you encouraged me to learn to build a new identity. I built a company that could see through every secret in the world. I became Daniel Cross so I could become a weapon." Marisol looked at her son. He was powerful and rich, but she saw the scars on his soul. "And now?" "And now," Daniel said, a cold light entering his eyes. "The men who tried to erase me are about to find out that I remember everything." Daniel didn't return just to say goodbye. He moved Marisol into a beautiful house with gardens and round-the-clock nurses to help her with her illness. But while she rested, Daniel went to work. He didn't use guns, he used code. He used his cybersecurity company to launch a global audit. In one single night, billions of dollars belonging to the crime syndicate were frozen. Encrypted emails were leaked to the press. Hidden bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands were exposed. The world watched in shock as famous politicians, judges, and businessmen were arrested. It was the largest criminal takedown in history, but Daniel had one specific target left. Agent Miller, the man who had sold a 9-year-old boy to his death, was now a high-ranking government contractor. He lived in a mansion and was respected by everyone. One evening, Miller returned home to find his security system had been turned off. Sitting in his office in the dark was a man. "Who are you?" Miller gasped, reaching for his desk drawer. "I'm a ghost from a bus stop in Santa Rosa," the man said. Daniel leaned forward into the light. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like the boy who had been barefoot in the rain. "I have the ledger, Miller," Daniel said, "the one my father died to protect. And I have the record of the $5 million you took to betray me. I've already sent it to the Justice Department. You have exactly 6 hours before they arrive." Miller's face went gray. "Please, I can give you anything. Money, Power? I have those things, Daniel said, standing up. What I didn't have for 22 years was a mother. Because of you, I had to leave the only person who ever loved me. That is a debt you can never pay. 6 hours later, the police arrived at Miller's mansion. They found him in his study. He was dead. The coroner ruled it a suicide. There was a note on his desk that simply said, "I thought I erased him. I was wrong." The authorities were confused. They knew Daniel Cross had been in the area. They knew he had a connection to Miller's past. They brought Daniel in for questioning. "We know who you are," a lead investigator said, leaning over the table. "You're Mateo Alvarez. You had a motive to kill him." Daniel looked at him calmly. "I don't know who that is. My name is Daniel Vega Cross. I was adopted by Marisol Vega in Santa Rosa. My records are perfectly legal." "We checked your fingerprints," the investigator snapped. "They don't match anything before the age of 9. It's like you didn't exist." "Exactly," Daniel said. "And if I didn't exist, how could I have a past with Mr. Miller?" The police were stuck. All the records of Mateo Alvarez had been burned in that apartment fire 22 years ago. The federal database had been scrubbed by Daniel's own hackers years earlier. There was no legal proof that Daniel Cross was anything other than a self-made man. There was only one person who could prove the truth. One person who knew the boy at the bus stop and the man in the SUV were the same. They went to Marisol. Marisol was sitting in her garden when the investigators arrived. They showed her pictures of the crime syndicate. They showed her pictures of Mateo's biological parents. "Mrs. Vega," the investigator said gently, "we know you found him. We know you raised him. If you just tell us that Daniel is Mateo Alvarez, we can close this case. We can bring justice to his real parents." Marisol looked at the photos. She saw the faces of the people who had been erased. Then she looked at the window of the house, where Daniel was standing, watching her. She remembered the soup. She remembered the math puzzles. She remembered the screams in the night. She turned back to the investigators. Her voice was thin, but it was as strong as iron. "I found a boy who was cold and hungry," Marisol said. "I gave him a name. I gave him a home. Whatever he was before that night, it doesn't belong to you. And whatever he became is on the world, not on him." "Are you saying he isn't Mateo Alvarez?" "I am saying he is my son," Marisol replied, "and a mother never betrays her son." The investigators left. Without her testimony, there was no case. There was no proof. The ghost child had successfully haunted the people who tried to destroy him, and now he was finally free. Marisol lived for 6 more months. They were the best months of her life. Daniel took her to the ocean, the real ocean, not the one in the books. He sat with her every night, listening to her stories about her own childhood. He hired the best doctors, but Marisol knew her time was coming. "You're a good man, Daniel," she whispered one evening as the sun set over the garden. "I'm a dangerous man, Mom," Daniel said, holding her hand. "No," Marisol said. "The world made you dangerous. I made you kind. Don't ever forget the difference." Marisol passed away peacefully in her sleep. She didn't die as a lonely cleaner in a government unit. She died as a beloved mother, surrounded by flowers and the man who had fought the world to get back to her. The funeral was small. Daniel didn't want the cameras or the fame. He wanted it to be quiet, just like Marisol's life had been. After the service, Daniel stood by the coffin. He looked at the town of Santa Rosa in the distance. He thought about the millions of people he had saved by exposing the syndicate. He thought about the billions of dollars he now controlled. He realized that Marisol Vega was the most powerful person he had ever met. She had no money and no weapons, but she had changed the destiny of a deleted boy. She had interrupted a criminal fate and turned a victim into a protector. He placed a single note on her coffin before they lowered it into the earth. It read, "You saved a boy the world tried to erase. I will spend my life making sure no one ever erases you." Daniel Cross didn't go back to his life as a cold billionaire. He used his wealth to create the Vega Foundation. He built shelters at every bus stop in the country. He created a system that protected ghost children, kids who had been lost in the system or targeted by bad people. He made sure that every child had a name, a record, and a mother figure to look after them. The crime syndicate was gone. Agent Miller was gone. But Marisol's name was everywhere. It was on the walls of schools, the covers of books, and the hearts of the children he saved. He realized that the greatest crime wasn't the stolen millions or the betrayal. The greatest crime was a world that allowed a 9-year-old to sit barefoot in the rain. Today, Daniel Vega Cross sits in a high-rise office. He is still the most powerful man in tech. He still sees every secret and hears every whisper. He knows that there are still bad people in the world. He knows that greed and betrayal never truly disappear. But he also knows that love is a weapon that can cut through the darkest night. Sometimes he drives back to Santa Rosa. He sits on that plastic bench at the outskirts of town. He looks at the rain and remembers the smell of cinnamon and chicken soup. He is no longer a ghost. He is a man who remembers everything. And because of Marisol, the world is a little bit safer for the boys with blue backpacks who are still waiting for someone to stop. Because the past never forgets, but it can be forgiven.